and this is grouped, such as our concern in relation to the Occupied Territories Bill, or to give it its proper name, Control of Economic Activity, Occupied Territories Bill 2018, which incorporates a ban on imports and services from the occupied areas. Supported by an advisory position on the illegality of Israel's occupation and settlements issued on the 29th of July 24 by the International Court of Justice. And just let me say that it takes on added meaning with Israel's announcement today that it intends to establish 22 further new settlements in the occupied West Bank.
Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks, Gerlach, and let me agree with the Deputy at the outset that it does take on an even greater level of concern after the horrific announcement today in relation to their plans to develop even further illegal settlements as well. So the situation in the West Bank is deeply concerning. It's clearly unacceptable, and I want to be clear at the outset that Ireland and the EU are strongly opposed to Israel's settlement policy and activities, including in and around East Jerusalem. In my intervention at the EU-Israel Association Council in February, I called attention to our strong opposition to Israel's settlement policy and activities, and to all actions that undermine the viability of the two-state solution, including extremist settler violence. Ireland has strongly supported the sanctions adopted by the EU against both individuals and entities involved in settler violence, and we continue to call for the imposition of further EU sanctions. At the meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council on the 20th of May, Ireland called for the immediate adoption of further sanctions targeting violent settlers. At the same meeting, the Foreign Affairs Council agreed to carry out a review of Israel's obligation under Article 2 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. The situation in the West Bank, where Israel is conducting its single largest operation in 20 years, is extremely concerning. It demands our urgent attention, it demands appropriate action. At least 40,000 people have been displaced since January. The UN Human Rights Chief told the United Nations Security Council last month that the announcement that residents must not return to their homes for a year raises serious concerns about long-term mass displacement. Combined with unprecedented levels of violence and record levels of settlement construction, there is a huge risk of further destabilisation. The UN Human Rights Office in the occupied Palestinian territory has expressed alarm at the decision of the Israeli Security Cabinet this month to resume land registration in Area C of the occupied West Bank. The role of the international community, including the United Nations and diplomatic missions on the ground, remains indispensable in terms of monitoring and reporting developments, and I wish to put on record that I was utterly appalled at reports that the IDF fired shots in the vicinity of a visit to Jenin on the 21st of May by a group of diplomats, including 2 Irish diplomats based in Ramallah. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but this is clearly intimidatory behaviour that must be condemned in the strongest terms. A senior official in my department has formally conveyed to the Ambassador of Israel my strong condemnation and deep concern at this incident, and we've called for a full explanation and indeed for accountability for those responsible, those who decided to fire shots in the direction of diplomats. In line with its obligations under international law, Israel must ensure the protection of foreign diplomats. Our mission in Ramallah plays an important role in monitoring the situation on the ground in Palestine. Our diplomats do an excellent job and must be allowed to do their job. Turning to the question of the legislation, as this House will be aware, the government carried out an extensive analysis and review of the Occupied Territories Bill late last year, the previous government now. The government's analysis was that substantive amendments would be required to most, if not all, of the bill's provisions in order to bring it in line with the Constitution and try to reduce risk of EU legal challenge. These considerations remain central to the government's approach. The new government and the programme for government sets out a clear commitment to progress legislation in prohibiting trade from the occupied Palestinian territory. The government's also clear that any legislation regulating trade with illegal settlements will be advanced as a necessary step to comply with international law, and it will be wrong for others to see it as a boycott against Israel, because I think it's important this bill is clear on what it is and what it isn't in terms of its legality. Consistent with the position of the EU, Ireland has been clear in underlining the policies and measures that distinguish between the state of Israel and illegal Israeli settlements that are clearly illegal under international law. I'm advancing this commitment in the programme for government. I've engaged with the sponsor of the current bill, which you've correctly named. I have made it clear to Senator Black that our approach now is to bring forward our own legislation. I don't wish to speak for the Senator, but I think her view is she doesn't care who brings forward the legislation once the legislation comes forward and advanced. That legislation will go, or the general scheme of that legislation will go to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the month of June. I'm conscious the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee is here in the Dáil as well. I will endeavour to get it there as early as possible in the month of June as well. I do want to just say again, I think we all agree on this, Ireland's trade with the occupied Palestinian territory is very limited. That's not a reason not to do this, not suggesting it is. It's the right thing to do. But we should, all of us, through our own various political movements, be encouraging other countries to do the same. Because I actually think that is one of the big benefits if a number of other countries join Ireland in passing legislation that we believe is compatible is compatible with EU law, and we ground that in the narrow route that is the ICJ advisory opinion and the Attorney General advice that flows from that.
Minister, Taoiseach, do you see the date on the Occupied Territories Bill, 2018? It's now 2025. I welcome that some progress has been made. However, it has taken the deaths and the slaughter of the figures I read out this morning, and they're totally inaccurate, 54,000 Palestinians. Totally inaccurate according to Lancet. It is much higher than that. At the very least, this Occupied Territories Bill needs to be pushed through before the summer to ban goods and services, if our word is to mean anything. I don't mind or care whether our trade is limited. This is something that needs to be done at its most basic. During the week, you refused to vote to stop the selling of bonds in Ireland. The approving of the prospectus, and you said it wouldn't comply with EU law. I have a completely different view if you look at EU law, number one. Number two, I asked a question, and it's really shocking the answer I'm after getting. First of all, I asked a very specific question, the investment of all state investments in Israeli bonds. It took to the very end to get the answer. The Ireland Strategic Investment Fund has invested in Israeli bonds. The most recent figures available at the end of 2023, no figures for 24. I'll finish my sentence just that entity now holds direct holdings totaling €2.62 million in Israeli war bonds.
Thank you. So I take the point that Deputy Connolly makes around the date on the original bill being 2018, I think. And that is, of course, a statement of fact. I would respectfully make the point back that trade has, for better or worse, and I'm happy to be in the European Union, but trade is an EU competency. And it has been the position of successive governments for quite a period of time that therefore any issues in that bill were a matter to be dealt with at an EU level rather than a member state level. The change, if you like, from at least from the government's legal understanding of the change was the ICJ advisory opinion. And I asked in my previous role as Taoiseach, I asked the then Attorney General, who's still the Attorney General, to look again at the ability of a member state to do something in the context of the ICJ advisory opinion, which, as Deputy Murphy reminds us, reminded nations of their obligation to act in this space. And the Attorney General helpfully and importantly came back and identified, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the legal advice in front of me, but he identified what I would describe as a narrow way forward. Not a risk-free way forward, we're not looking for a risk-free way forward, by the way, but a narrow way forward to progress legislation. And it was on that basis that, certainly when I entered the general election campaign, and I think when many of us did, it was on that basis that I think every political party in Dáil Éireann or every grouping was committing to enacting legislation in this space. So I take the 2018 point, but I do just want to, on the record of the House, outline why I believe it to be different now, at least legally, than it was in 2018. Deputy Murphy and Deputy Merkel and Deputy Stanley, and I'm quite sure Deputy Connolly, are all asking a very fair question in terms of, tell us the legal difference in relation to the goods versus services, and that's a perfectly appropriate question to ask. My understanding, and I'm doing this without the benefit of advice in front of me, but my understanding is that there is a clearer delineation of goods and services at an EU level for a member state to act. However, can I tell you that I intend to seek the updated advice of the Attorney General in relation to that, because I take the point that I heard Deputy Murphy make, I've heard Deputy O'Gorman make it before in relation to the Attorney General advice that's published there. I don't have a policy difference. I mean, I'm doing this with you all, I hope, because we're horrified by the genocide that we're seeing happening. We want to take an action, and we hope that it inspires and motivates others and helps bring about pressure on Israel to end what's happening in Gaza. But obviously the position that I occupy, we've got to make sure that it's legally robust, and I think we all share that view. So like when I spoke to Senator Black, and again I don't like invoking her name or speaking for her, she'll be able to speak for herself, but when I spoke to Senator Black, I made the point that the position of my department from a legal point of view was that goods was potentially legally permissible, services may not be. And I also said I'm happy to be proven wrong on that. Final thing I would say is, and this is just a different point, but there's a practical implication around services that isn't to the policy space. There's a practical implication to how you'd enforce the services issue rather than the goods issue, but that's also.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy.
The Occupied Territories Bill, however limited, has to be passed for goods and services. It's the least we can do. That's number one. Number two, the constant refrain that Europe might take infringement proceedings against us is unacceptable. Let's face that if it happens. There's a genocide happening in our name while we stand here and talk, so we need to take action. The limited way that you're dealing with the central bank's role and your refusal to look at that is also part of this discussion, because you're limiting it to the 3 C's, comprehensibility, consistency and some other C. And you're not looking at the overall obligation on the central bank to comply with its own Central Bank Act that says it must comply with European law, which lays down fundamental human rights. It's not even being measured against that or public policy. And similarly now, we're here with state investment. We're actually investing in war bonds. So we've moved beyond asking the central bank to stop the role that they have, and if they can't, then bring in the necessary legislation. But we now find out that we're actually investing public money in war bonds.
Thank you, Deputy.
All right, thanks very much. So look, I as you can imagine, I'll be engaging with the Attorney General as we seek to advance this general scheme. And I suppose that was the point I was making, Deputy Stanley, that obviously I've had the conversations that we had, let's say, in the last government, in terms of was it possible to move forward with an Occupied Territories Bill. I do want to say, and I accept that line Deputy Murphy's quoting is accurate in terms of the political choice piece, but I would also say from being in the briefings with the Attorney General and indeed hearing the now Taoiseach, when he was in my role, addressing the Foreign Affairs Committee, I mean, it is the clear legal view of the government that the current bill wouldn't have been legally permissible. That is genuinely the legal advice available to the government. Yeah, sorry, no, you're right. I'm sorry, that was an option. You could amend line by line or section by section, and our view was that actually bringing forward a new bill was just a better way of doing it. On the issue of services, I'm open to persuasion on this, because it's not a persuasion that you need to do from a policy point of view. I'm open to persuasion as to this bill's work, but I'm not afraid of infringement proceedings. There's much more important things going on in the world, but I do want to pass a bill that is robust, is practical, and legally versatile. I can't pass legislation that I believe not to be legal.